Nanonga katwaye daga man Leo Numpo Johnson. Maranga ba moy ba sha. Aba moy kuiwashu. Beneve kutanga kugana kuva kuhi wongaka or the tanga the gana the vagu hi wongaka so maranga ba moy aga klave beneve nga ba moy kuiwashu aga kwaku kele kwaku ngaka. I sit before you today in fulfillment of a sacred duty in accordance with the reality of a new nation's creed. One that cuts deep into the fabric of why we should even be called a nation. Every time I walk down the streets of Monrovia, watch events in Liberia on social media, I cannot help thinking that we now have a new creed for our nation. It is no longer those famous words of the Pledge of Allegiance that was drilled into our heads from kindergarten through high school. One nation indivisible with liberty and justice for all. Fellow Liberians, the reality is we now have a new creed, and here it is. In the hands of Zogos, the future of our nation lies. And their plight is the greatest injustice ever faced by this nation. But our anger and outrage must not be directed at them. We must hold accountable those that committed the avoidable atrocity of turning babies into killing machines. We must unite against those that are resolved to benefit from the devastation and the calamity we now face in the name of politics. Those that are resolved on benefiting from the pain, the suffering, and destruction of our young people by turning them into militants so that they too can eventually become Zogos. Fellow Liberians, this is the reality of the state. The future is Zogo. Fellow Liberians, this is the reality of the state. But we have a choice. We can either ignore it or suffer the consequences that we now know so well because no one will be spared. Or we can acknowledge it, invoke the urgency of the moment, and rally our nation to see them for the victims that they are and offer them the support they need. At this point, I would like to thank His Excellency Dr. George Manawia for fulfilling his constitutional responsibility as president and father of our nation through his recent State of the Nation address in accordance with Article 58 of the Constitution of Liberia, covering the economic condition of the nation, including expenditure and income. I also want to congratulate the president on the many achievements highlighted in his message as he sought to give an account of his stewardship of the nation. Your Excellency, in my State of the Reality address, I would like to draw your attention to a number of issues that the nation still has no clear direction about. Let me begin with economic justice. Mr. President, at your historic inauguration in January 2018, you made an emphatic commitment, and I quote, "We cannot remain spectators in our own economy. My government will prioritize the interests of Liberian-owned businesses and offer programs to help them become more competitive and offer services that international investors seek as partners." 4 years later, our people do not even have spectator status in their own economy, Mr. President. 4 years later, our people live on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of economic wealth in the hands of few powerful elites. 4 years later, Mr. President, people still languish in the corners of the Liberian society and find themselves treated as strangers in their own land. And so, I've come here today to demonstrate a shameful condition that unless we pursue economic justice, your efforts are all in vain. Mr. President, despite the economic strides your government has made as reported in your message, the real entrepreneurs on whose shoulders this country survives are not even considered in our economic calculations. Our people selling in Douala, Red Light, Waterside, Town, where 75% of Liberians go to transact business, have not even received an invitation to the game. How can they become players when they have not even achieved spectator status? Mr. President, you have made some tremendous strides in building respectable market structures to restore the dignity of our people. But they too want to look at the economic report and numbers being submitted to the IMF and the World Bank and see the acknowledgement of their contributions to our economy at the very top of the list because they contribute the most. We can no longer consider these markets outliers in our economy, Mr. President. In fact, they are the foundation of our economy. If it wasn't for these markets and the resilience of our entrepreneurs doing business in them, there will be no economy to begin with. Instead of ignoring them, let us work with them, organize the markets, capture and reflect their contributions. This will at least give them spectator status. Then we can move closer to your dream of elevating their importance for support from government and international players who will come to the realization that their investments must be directed to where it will yield the most results, and that is to the people on whose shoulders the economy relies. This, Mr. President, is the pathway to not just making our people players in their economy, but coaches in growing the economy as well. Our people have stood the test of time despite everything they've been through. And they refuse to accept that the bank of economic justice is bankrupt. Seize the opportunity now, Mr. President. It will be fatal to ignore the urgency of the moment. I also want to applaud your bold effort in making post-secondary education free at all public universities. A step which I believe came from a place of genuine passion against the historical marginalization of majority of our people, where they were denied access to education. But the question that lingers on my mind is this: what good is it accessing an education system that was designed to eradicate the original cultures, value systems, and productivity of our society, and replace it with one that was believed to be superior only because it came from the West? We have an education system that teaches us that we are inferior and must try to be like everyone else except ourselves. Fellow Liberians, it was in 1881 that Dr. Edward Wilmot Blyden, who was at the time president of Liberia College, laid out an educational program for the African Center instruction of Liberian students and for youth throughout the African continent. He wrote, spoke, preached that the ingredients of genuine and permanent progress in Liberia and the rest of Africa are found in the teaching of our students about the true history and culture of our people and their contributions to the world civilizations. Instead, we find ourselves teaching our children to condemn their cultures and who they are because others are better than them. Inspired by these thoughts, here are few policy proposals for the way forward, Mr. President. That all public universities be transformed into applied universities or colleges in response to a practical vision for economic growth. Our universities should be the driving force and engine for economic growth and productivity, not a liability that is the single major contributor to unemployment and economic decay. That is the only way we will be able to control our natural resources, because when we have mathematicians, chemists, engineers, and experts skilled in applied science, mining, manufacturing, and building industries, we will not need the IMF predicting and detecting our growth. Instead, we will be directing the IMF on how they can participate in our progress. Liberia today resembles what Germany looked like in 1945 after World War II. 1.5 million prisoners of war, 1 million wounded German soldiers, millions of refugees and displaced persons of many different nationalities, no working transport or communication services, industry and agriculture at a standstill, scarcity of food and the risks of starvation and epidemics of diseases were the order of the day. As a result, Germany built an education system rooted in applied learning and education in direct response to their reality. It is that system that their country thrives on today. Their education system was built as a response to Germany's problems. In contrast to Liberia, where we are still hanging on to the relic of the miseducation sold to us through Western education as highlighted by Dr. Blyden. Fellow Liberians, 51% of the German workforce are trained through applied and technical colleges and universities. Thus, Germany is one of the world's strongest economies today and have one of the lowest youth unemployment rates in the world. Fellow Liberians, we have an agricultural college but cannot figure out how to grow rice to meet our country's demands. We have a business school but must rely on our mothers in the local markets to keep the country's economy afloat. We do not need more politicians and sociologists. Instead, our country is dying for plumbers, technicians, carpenters, farmers, entrepreneurs, electricians, and the list goes on. For example, if a young person is smart in mathematics in Liberia, your future is doomed if you do not travel outside of Liberia. Your highest accomplishment might be a school teacher that finds themselves or finds delight in failing students to collect bribes or sex for grades. If we cannot direct the education of our population to serve the interests and needs of our nation, then we are of no use to ourselves. My second recommendation is that all 16 languages should be taught in Liberian schools from kindergarten to grade 6. Liberia needs to develop a curriculum that includes and values our languages and cultures as an integral part of our identity. There is no reason why, Mr. President, in this enlightened age, Liberians are taught to value and celebrate everyone else except themselves. Up until now, Liberian education and social realities consist of alien cultural values and notions of inferiority that are taught to students, who in turn teach it to their children and grandchildren, and the cycle continues. In the words of Kim Il-sung, president of North Korea, they were able to quickly jump ahead in their nuclear missile technology program by using indigenous knowledge. Fellow Liberians, our indigenous knowledge and identity is buried deep in the structure of our languages. If we can find a way to develop a French curriculum and find enough French teachers to be mandatorily taught in our schools, there is no reason why we cannot teach our languages in our schools. Now you might wonder, how is that even possible, since we don't have our languages developed in written structures and formats? To that I say, the same way we begin teaching our children the English language in kindergarten by making them recite sentences orally. If we can teach them ABC orally, we can teach them Pele or any of our languages orally. You see, literacy is not education, my friends. You can be literate and very uneducated, and vice versa. It is time to value the sophistication of our languages. They do not need to be written as a prerequisite. Progress means empowering all schools in a county like Lofa County to teach all 5 dominant languages, Loma, Pele, Kisi, Bandi, and Mandingo. This can be done by ensuring every child is required to learn at least one of those languages by the time they are in grade 6. If they can learn more than one in the process, even better. Unlocking our identity code through our languages and cultures will not only foster unity, it will enable us to harness the power that still resides within the core of our ancient cultural ideals and philosophical doctrines that built the foundations of human civilizations. Today, many Liberians are pondering an important question. Why is Liberia not developing and harnessing the tremendous sources of innovation and indigenous knowledge that reside within the Liberian people? Instead, surrendering our scarce resources to foreign knowledge that has proven detrimental to our culture and environment over the years. In my attempt to answer this complicated question, here is what I say. It goes back to historical events of 1822 when repatriated Africans from America arrived on the shores of Liberia. According to renowned Liberian educator Dr. Mary Antoinette Brown Sherman in 1989, the repatriated Africans were instilled with the idea that they were on a Christianizing, civilizing mission. They were led to believe that they were on a mission to spread the light of the gospel and of civilization to the uncivilized Africans they met in Liberia. This was their reliance for creating a horrendous system that isolated indigenous Liberian children from their parents, for the purpose of instruction, lest they become corrupted. Indigenous Liberians fought to preserve their cultures and societies by placing their young ones into the Poro and Sende society in response to this atrocity. Despite these efforts, the ruling class in Liberia perpetuated discriminatory practices for over 100 years against the Liberian masses based upon a misguided, false notion of superiority as was practiced on the slave plantations emanating from Western colonialism. As the African proverb says, the lion continues to rule the forest because baby lions are taught that it is their birthright. So if we Liberians believe we are inferior by virtue of our culture and languages, how can we expect respect from other nations? It is unimaginable that in the 21st century, Liberia's education system does not value the cultural and social experiences of its indigenous populations. Our education system fails miserably to teach the historical activities and cultural contributions of our people prior to European and American contact. Instead, we champion the false narrative that our civilization began with the contact with those from America and Europe. To our leaders in the opposition, you can begin to lead by example, by doing the practical things that matter. President Weah fulfilled his duty by giving account of the state of the nation and its economy. We can debate and criticize his account, but we are yet to see audited financial reports from your institutions since I was born. It is a legal requirement under our election laws. So how can you expect to adequately manage the resources of our nation when you cannot demonstrate seeing now? There's a universal principle that if you want to know whether an institution is functioning well, dive into the financials. You have an opportunity to give us an opportunity to deepen the vision for where Liberia can go so our people can choose from the field of adequate and competent competition. Now your head might be spinning and thinking, how will we do all this when our budget is a meager 500 to 600 million? It is a known fact that our political governance systems only know so well how to spend money from everybody else, but do poorly in generating their own. That is why my reflections create a pathway to raise at least $100 million immediately to bring some policy points to fruition. I'm going to start with dual citizenship. The dual citizenship crisis is a solution and a gift rather than a problem. It is not and must not be a political undertaking. It is and has always been an economic driver waiting to be unleashed. I say to you today, To him or her whom much is given, much is required. Those who have been fortunate to go into countries in the diaspora, become successful, and most of the time had no choice but to take on citizenship of other countries, but yet yearning to maintain their Liberian identity. This is an opportunity to repeat and reiterate to them that your natural born Liberian citizenship is God-given and inalienable, and nobody should ever be able to take it away. However, the privilege to hold another passport, in addition, is not afforded and accorded to all Liberians. So you must be able to account for that privilege. What is wrong with implementing an economic policy of instituting a dual citizenship tax? That you can be able to account for your privilege so that Liberians in Liberia don't have to feel cheated, because you have an opportunity and access that they don't have, but they can feel grateful that you are willing to contribute your account of your privilege to the cause of nation building. What is wrong with requiring Liberians with dual citizenship owning real estate or real property or asset in Liberia no less than $5,000 in value, so that we all can put our money where our mouth is, so that we all can have an organized way of contributing to the future of the nation through nation building? Another thing I will look at is education reform and scholarships. Instead of sending children overseas at the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars to be educated in ways that leave them stranded when they return, because what Liberia needs is not a research-based Western education. No, we are far removed from that reality. We need a practical form of education, as I have indicated, rooted in our cultures, rooted in our challenges, as a direct response to where we should go as a nation. Instead, we should be facilitating that support from international partners in millions of dollars to educational reforms and building of institutions that are responsive to our needs. What is wrong with telling our friends from China, telling our friends from the United States, telling our friends from the European Union, that instead of spending hundreds of millions to take hundreds of students of Liberians to your countries to be educated in your ideals and understanding of the world, let us build a state-of-the-art applied and technical university in Liberia. Let us transform UL so that we can educate our own by our own. By doing that, we don't need to go and look for PhDs to be professors. We can tap into what is called industry-based professors. People in Liberia who have earned their badges of honor by their expertise and wealth of experience and knowledge in carpentry, in agriculture, in plumbing, in engineering. They do not need to have a PhD in research. They can demonstrate their practical knowledge and ability that can be equivalent to become an industry-based professors, which will see us rely on our own innovation to educate our children and not depend on our children going to China to learn how to build Chinese-style buildings. That is the reason why we wonder in Liberia how we cannot figure out how to design a building that takes advantage of the natural sunlight so no one needs to turn on a light bulb before 5 p.m. Why can we not ask for those support to transform or to reform our education system and transform public universities into applied technical institutions that will become not only the economic driver of our economy, but will generate economic dividends by leveraging our indigenous knowledge, where we are not only looking for PhDs, but we are also now looking for the people who have built and kept our country surviving by their expertise, innovation, and resilience. My friends, robust development of the nonprofit sector and social enterprise is another cardinal piece to the future of our young people. The business of government being the major source of job creation or reliance on big corporations to support the unemployment crisis is a relic of the past. Instead, we should be creating an autonomous nonprofit regulatory agency that will ensure international NGOs operating in Liberia are in sync with government's priorities of national development and are paying appropriate regulatory fees that can be used to foster training and the capacity building of local organizations to compete in the international market of multi-million-dollar grants. Our friends who bring international NGOs to Liberia have the capacity and have the finances. We haven't been able to organize them to contribute to the development of our own social enterprise and non-for-profit sector. They have the resources. Let's organize them to know that we don't always want to rely on you coming from overseas. We want to build our own capacity. Countries like Canada and the United States have done it well. You need to apply to have a 501c3 status, but beyond that, there are other requirements you must meet. How can we translate their direct contributions to our national agenda for development, not based on what they think, but based on what we develop and ask them to participate in? If a local youth group in Nigeria can bring Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook to Lagos and attract major investments, our young people in Liberia can do the exact same. They only need us to facilitate the pathways and organize the resources that they need. Why are we not confronting the Zogo crisis like we should? A national policy that mobilizes all sectors to take on Liberia's most pressing challenge, the Zogo crisis. A policy that will determine whether we survive as a nation or not. There is no reason why we cannot work with churches and religious institutions in Liberia to include the building of rehabilitation centers and mental health training as part of their church buildings and establishments. There is no reason why we cannot mobilize our resources to make the rehabilitation and support of our brothers and sisters and reintegration into society priority number one, because it is the greatest threat to our survival as a nation. In the words of Dr. King, the church must be reminded that it is not the master or servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal in directing the future of the nation, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. Let's talk about the rule of law and governance. My friends, how can we expect to get good governance out of a constitution that we adopted that is one of the most corrupt documents today that exists and defines our nation's governance? The Constitution of Liberia is corrupt. It was designed to marginalize the masses of our population. And in 1986, instead of seizing the opportunity for genuine reform, it was taken by the then military government and turned into a machine through which they can implement their atrocities. Don't take my word for it. Open the Constitution to Article 97. Article 97 says that no members of the military regime or the military that took over in a bloody coup, that no member of the PRC, which was the People's Redemption Council, shall ever be prosecuted for crimes that they were about to commit and were committing by any court of jurisdiction in or outside of Liberia. It's still in your constitution today. I will not go into depth on that. Please read your constitution. My friends, brothers and sisters, just as we chose to fall behind, we can also choose to surge forward. Just as we are knowledgeable of the problems, we are also knowledgeable of the solutions. All it takes is the courage to make the right decisions. We need Liberian minds creating Liberian solutions to Liberian problems within the parameters of who we are, each one of us. All institutions must be mobilized to do their part within their means. The gold, the diamonds, the rubber, the iron ore, and natural resources are no longer our greatest asset and cannot deliver us from this mess. Our greatest asset as a nation remains our young people. Without them, there's no country, there's no future. Thus, all of our natural resources shall become irrelevant. That is why we must pay attention, because the future of Liberia right now is Zogo. Failure to change this trajectory We are all doomed as we are beginning to see it unravel. In the Pele language, there is a parable that says, it is your cutlass throwing hands that the town people can see before they call coup onto your farm. So we want to see your cutlass throwing hands, everybody, as Liberians. Where is your place within our society? Because it is that we allow the rally to happen, because Liberians are leading. It is that will allow us to rise from the ashes of decay. It is that will allow us to know that God has endowed us and blessed us with everything we need to turn our country into what it should be. But we have been misled, miseducated, and deceived to turn to everything else except the wealth of talents and resources that we have. I urge you today, my fellow Liberians, to look no further for our solutions, because it is right under our feet. It begins with us tapping into the wealth and power of our indigenous knowledge. No, our PhD and master degrees sitting in Monrovia are not the only educated people. Some of the most educated people are our village chiefs and elders who do not speak, read, or write a word of English, but are by far more educated and sophisticated. Ask yourself, why is the poor and ascended society so organized and has lasted the test of times? It survived wars. It survived suppression for over 100 years. It survived everything thrown at it and still remain in order. Ask yourself why our villages and towns are not littered with garbage and feces. Ask yourself why the quality of air that flows in our villages and towns are superior in quality compared to what we breathe in Monrovia. Ask yourself why our villages and towns are not suffering from overcrowdedness, why they understand how to expand in an orderly fashion compared to the chaos that is unfolding in Monrovia. It has to be education. It has to be sophistication. So we must move from the place of thinking that education is literacy in English or French. No, education is not literacy. Education is the ability to acquire, develop knowledge, and implement it in the ways for which it was acquired. And that, my friends, we have it. We don't need no expert from anywhere. We don't need the IMF to tell us what we need to do to grow the economy. We have people in Liberia. We don't need no complicated graph as examples from Western economies, because we are different. Our story is different. Our fundamentals are different. We need our people in red light market. We need to organize our people in red light, in Douala, in Waterside, to start to understand the trajectory and of the things that they do that have kept red light market continuously expanding despite the poverty, that have kept children in universities and colleges and in schools that are very expensive despite the enormous poverty, that has helped a local market woman to educate 7 children consistently from a table market. Ladies and gentlemen, the future is now. It is Zogo. We can change it, we can accept it, we can acknowledge it, or we can ignore it at our own detriment and be doomed.